Everybody, thanks for watching. Just a quick reminder that Merkabah Scholar Society ends today. You'll have basically until noon tomorrow to get in. After that, the links will be completely changed. This is your last chance to get in at that price. So make sure you guys take advantage while you still can. This video will go out tonight, but then afternoon tomorrow, the links will be basically completely different. So make sure you guys get in now while you still can. And I appreciate everybody who has joined, who got in. If you guys got the welcome email, that means you are in. NDAs are still going out. And don't worry, if you don't sign your NDA by tomorrow's first meeting, you'll get another shot before the second one. Just understand you'll have to sign the NDA before the second meeting. This is just the intro meeting. We're going to just get into what we're going to be talking about and doing in Merkabah Scholar Society. We have books, we have clothes, we have logos, we have creeds, we have a lot of information to get into. And, we're going to talk about a lot tomorrow. So make sure you guys check your email and you'll get that link for that meeting. And it's going to be cool. So I appreciate everybody who inquired. I appreciate people who sent a lot of emails just with appreciation. As I said before, it's a lot of professionals who wanted this. A lot of people who want to join something like this that have professional backgrounds and they don't want to do something that's so public. So that's one of the reasons for the NDAs, to keep people's identity secret and to basically keep the information that we're going to be getting into, amongst ourselves, certain things. But it's going to be cool. It's going to be a lot we're going to get into. And for the people who felt like, $29.99 was too much to join the society, I guarantee you're going to regret that. But I appreciate everybody for understanding the whole point of this and believing in what I'm trying to do here. And I feel like I can really get into the kind of information I want to get into with this group and people who understand why I did this whole separation and what's for it. For everybody else, you're going to be proven wrong for whatever doubts you had about the situation, and you'll see exactly what I was talking about. But we got into a lot of information in the lives. We talked about a lot in the lives. And I appreciate everybody participating on that. But there's going to be very little lives on YouTube, after today. So, you won't see me on there as much anymore. Once in the blue moon, I'll do a live on YouTube. But that's going to be the end of that. All lives going to be dedicated to Merkabah Scholar Society and Merkabah Academy from here on out. So you guys will see lives on those. And we will have meetings on there as well. And a lot of information will be shared there. But I'm not dealing with YouTube and these people that's just impossible to reason with. And it's just full of too many just weirdos. A lot of people are not serious about this information. They don't even understand what scholarship is. They don't even understand what this knowledge is. And there's a lot of people who just jump on there with no real understanding of what we really talk about. So if you watch my videos and understand how serious the information is, and what I've put out over the years, then you get the angle. You understand? You understand the direction that we're going in here. And I put out a lot of, coded, occult, esoteric knowledge over the years. And it's all been leading towards something. So we'll get into all of that. But I appreciate everybody for believing in Merkabah Scholar Society and understanding what I'm trying to do. And it's definitely going to be one of the best decisions you ever made. Trust me on that. So tomorrow you guys get an email that's going to have the information about the first meeting. I know I already got emails from people. There's a lot of people that's overseas, a lot of people who got stuff to do. They might not be able to make the first meeting. But as I said, all meetings will be recorded and everybody will get the video link sent to your email after the meeting and everything. So you guys can go ahead and watch. So even if you can't make the meeting, don't stress. Don't worry about it. You guys will get the email for the video and you can watch it. So you can have that information for the next meeting. So it's going to be, a lot of information shared, but it's going to be in steps. So you guys, make sure you understand what's talked about in the first video and how it's going to be basically pertaining to the next one, So it's a lot we got to get into, but it's going to be cool. A lot of cool information. And, nothing to worry about, nothing to stress. Again, I talked briefly about what we're going to be getting into, but I'm glad people understand. And I feel like we can really do things and make moves with this group of people, with this new understanding of how we're going to be moving forward the way it's supposed to be, with like-minded people and people who understand how important this information is and what we need to do with it. So yeah, I wanted to put this quick note out real quick before we get into this rundown. Still got to put out the rundown. Still gonna be videos on YouTube, of course. I put out. There's still gonna be new videos coming out. If you are never paid, again, remember you guys will still get those free videos, what have you, and you guys still have access to that information. One of the fixes that we found for our Merkabah Academy is to reset your password. So if you have a never pay again membership and for some reason you can't get access to certain pages, go ahead and activate the reset password feature and just reset your password and log back in. That usually fixes a lot of the issues for some people. I know WordPress is still actually working on the site again. One of the reasons for Merkabah Scholar Society, one of the reasons that we're going to move the site over to a different platform. So it's some bugs still being worked out. Not our fault, not our issue. That has to do with WordPress and a lot of the plugins. Again, this is a site that we're building to basically test for a different site. So there's some issues, but don't worry, all that stuff is going to be fixed and taken care of. Again, one of the reasons why I'm doing this, because to put all that time, work, and money and effort into that site, just to have people who are not serious about it on there, people who are not supportive on there, it's not worth it. So a lot of the main things are going to be moved over to Merkabah Scholar Society, and I'll utilize those things there for that society because it's not worth it. I'm not willing to put the time and effort into it on Merkabah Academy because the support is just not there. But yeah, let's get into this video, one of the rundowns. And again, make sure you guys check out these videos, man. It's a lot of information in these videos. I put out a bunch of rundowns before. Get this knowledge. It's important. You're going to understand how it's leading up to things and what it all means. But yeah, let's get into this video. I thank everybody for taking the time to watch and everybody who supported Merkabah Scholar Society. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Let's get into this video. The thing is, every single thing, all of it, goes back to Satan, which Satan is Saturn. Now, if you just watch my God of 2025 video, you're going to need to have seen that video. You don't have to see it now, but make sure you watch it after this. It'll make a lot more things make sense because that God, of course, is Saturn. But you'll understand it's going to fit perfectly with this video, which is why I waited to put this out. So we go back again. You think about everything, the culmination of all of it. It's giving you Saturn, everything. Forget what you think. Forget the Satan, the demons, all these so-called gods that's supposed to have been worshipped. It's pointing you to Saturn when you really understand what's going on. So now think, you have to make this connection, Saturn-Satan connection. Most people have. But then a lot of people just stay on Satan because that's the more popular one that we're seeing, right? Saturn is just, esoterically placed here and there. But you got to remember the worship of Saturn was going on, long before Satan was ever even thought of. And that's what they did, was parlay the whole situation into Satan and hide it there. And that's going to make a lot more sense coming up. And that's what it is. They hid Saturn within Satan and within a bunch of other things. But again, throughout the Old Testament and throughout the ancient world, we find this worship of Saturn by many different names. And that's one of the things that confused people, is by many different names. And all of it is talking about Saturn, when you understand. So we got to look back, and I talked about this before. Something happened on this planet. Something happened. And it happened more recently than, what we're being told. And I say more recently because, as I said, there was this change. There was this global change in the way things were. And there was a huge switch. And we see that especially in Kemet in Egypt with the fall of the dynastic Egyptians. And we see this change in which would eventually become the European way of living, when you understand. But again, you got to think about, as I said, all the war, everything that they did, the fighting and everything, the control, the conquering, the killing, all of it just to give us a religion. If you're going to take the time and dominate a people to where you're wiping them out and kicking them out of their lands, and you have that kind of force to do so, which we look and see, Greek Empire, they took over all of Northern Africa. Same thing with the Romans. If you got that kind of pull and move, you got to think, you're in power now. Like, what would make you go through all that just to put out a doctrine? Understand? So again, Greeks had their own way of worship before Judaism, same thing with the Romans, but we see that they all came into this fold of religion, right? Gotta understand this, big point. So we see all this happening. We see that something had changed the way that they were doing things. And I talked about with the ancient Egyptians how they were being buried a certain way for a long time. And then that changed as if they knew what was coming as they paved the way. So basically the elites in the ancient Egyptian empire, they understood what was about to happen. They left. And as I said, when I went to Egypt, I paid that money to go into the temple of Osiris to see what it was talking about. And as I said, it's telling them to not come back here, to leave, as if they knew what was coming. So there was some type of cosmic plan, some type of agenda that changed the way the ancient world was and was going to bring in this new way of living, which is what we get once the Europeans took control. As I said, the ancient Egyptians, these ancient civilizations understood what was going on. And it was worshiping these beings coming down. And then all of a sudden they stopped coming down. And then we get the, Europeans come in, they take over, the Egyptians were conquered, so on and so forth. And we have this big change from this ancient spiritual way of living to this materialistic European way of existing. But still, we find this worship of Saturn all over. Remember the Phoenicians, El is Saturn. We find this worship of El. And I got into the whole thing with the Phoenicians, how we know they were Egyptians, right? So that gives you the understanding that the Egyptians was worshiping Saturn as well, and they was. So we have this worship of Saturn with the Phoenicians. We see it with the Babylonians. So we know the Assyrians was also worshiping Saturn. We see the depictions all over the place. Many different names for Saturn, all going back to Saturn. We see this worship all throughout the ancient world by different names talking about the same thing. We also find throughout the ancient world many different mythologies, stories. The way they told these things, it's just something people ignore, that we cannot, that all these different civilizations had the same thing in common, to where they taught about their deities through mythologies, through stories. Think about that. It's as if they couldn't tell them straight up what was going on or what was it all about. Now, you got to think about that, because if you tell them what's going on, it changes their ability to perceive and to basically expand and grow their consciousness. As I said, what happened with the ancient Egyptians. See, these other ancient civilizations knew there was beings out there. They were worshiping them. They knew what was going on. All that had to change, because you can't grow. You're not going to expand if you know what's out there and what's going on. They had to leave it all to mystery. We can't tell you. That is the whole reason for these stories. And I talked about this before. I wanted to save the answer to that question for this last video. But that's what it is. We can't tell you, because we take away choice. We take away your ability to go and search and find, which is going to expand your vocabulary, your knowledge, your way of thinking. It's going to expand your experience, which is the main thing, and allow you to grow. So this had to be stopped, and everything was put in stories and parables, so the people wouldn't know straight up what was happening and what was going on. It had to be done this way. So as I said, hundreds of years of war, people dying, all that just to give us a book, a religion. But the key to everything, the universe, is in these religions. Everything's in there. So we have this worship of Saturn that needed to be stopped and changed, because then people would know what Saturn is and what's going on there. So this is why we have the conversion and the changes and all the parables of Saturn that's in these different religions. So you got to understand, why is it done this way? So when I say parables, Bible's and parables, there's a bunch of allegories or what have you, stories. So what I mean by that is, the easiest way to say it is, there's many different names or different meanings behind these beings. There's many different names for God, different names for Jesus. So understand that. So we have God, and then we have Jesus, right? So Jesus is supposed to be the Son of God, but Jesus is also supposed to be God. God is the Son. Jesus is supposed to represent the Son. Jesus, the Son of God. So this is that whole confusion that people get into. It's like, well, it means many different things. And if Jesus is God and God is the Son and Jesus is the Son, we talk about the same being, right? Easy to understand. It's just put in many different ways, different aspects to give you understanding about different things. That's all it is. So we could say, oh, Jesus and God go by many different names, but they can mean, many different things. And that's basically what it is. So we have that. We have that whole conundrum where God is the Son, Jesus is the Son, Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is God, right? Think about that. We had God supposedly, this is all story, of course, basically impregnate Mary to give birth to himself in a physical form, right? That's the story. So then we have that whole thing going on. But of course, before this, because this is where they got it from, people just now start to understand it. This is what we get with the ancient Egyptian story. You have Osiris, which a lot of people don't realize that Osiris represents Saturn as well. So you'll see more so that Saturn being represented by Horus. And you'll see people refer to, Osiris as the bull, Apis, or what have you, or you'll see him refer to Horus as the bull. We know that's going back to Saturn as well. But it's the same type of situation where you have Osiris, who basically died, and Isis basically brought him back, and he's reincarnated or brought back as his son or himself, which is Horus. So Horus would basically be Osiris, if you understand, he'll basically be Osiris, which is the son of God or God himself. Same thing like with Christianity, right? It's going to make a lot of sense. So you have that whole thing going on, and it's the same type of parabolistic situation where Osiris represents many different things, so does Horus, but they all go back to the same thing, which would be Saturn, right? So just like with Jesus representing the sun, it's the same thing with Ra. You understand? Same thing with Horus. It's the sun. It's giving you all the same things. It's just here, there to confuse you. Let's talk about the same thing. The whole ancient world worship has to deal with three things: the sun, the moon, Saturn. That is it. It's nothing else. Everything else was just, planetary stuff that mixed in and was, anthropomorphized and put into these stories to go along with these three main things, which would be Saturn, the moon, and the sun. So one of the biggest things people don't get is the worship of Saturn in ancient Egypt. As I said, Osiris represented Saturn as well as Horus. We see this depiction of the bull. It's talking about Saturn. So understand it, right? So just think about it. They're worshiping Saturn during this time. It's a lot going on. So you look at worship of Saturn in ancient Egypt. Now let's go to the biblical history, right? So in the biblical history, you have this worship of Saturn going on, right? You have the whole Exodus, everything happening with the Jews and Moses and all that that's going on. They're giving you a deeper understanding in that story. And there's so many different understandings in that story, much in a way, as I said, Jesus represents the Son, God represents the Son, and that same type of situation. It's different stories within the stories. And it's crazy when you start to break this down. So as I talked about before, you have this whole story, the Exodus, and we know what took place. Moses leading the people out of Egypt to go do what, right? There is no Judaism at this time, right? So think about it. They're giving you real history in the same way, as I said before, there's only one people who fit the Hebrews going out and conquering these lands, and that's the Greeks. So you have that going on. You have the Greeks putting themselves in those shoes as the Israelites, and they're going out conquering. They're using their own history and putting it in the book. But in the same way, with this Exodus story, it's telling you the same thing. Because you got to think about it. Just look at it from this point of view. Moses is leading the people out of Egypt, right? He's leading them out. Along the way, these people, they don't have confidence in Moses, one, even though he just set them free, right? They're leaving. They go to Mount Sinai. Moses is up there talking to God, getting the commandments, what have you. And then he comes down, or while all this is going on, they're trying to worship something. They're like, we don't know if this dude coming back. You need to give us something to worship, because they know that's how things work. Now, we see when Moses come down, they're worshiping the bull calf, and we all interpret that to mean Taurus, the bull. but it's Osiris, it's Horus, the bull, that they actually worshiping. They're worshiping Saturn. But in that same way, it means Taurus as well, which would be the age that came before them, and they was in the worshiping the wrong age. As I said before, they had to be in Aries is where they needed to be worshiping. But Moses comes down, tell them, they're doing things wrong. He breaks the Ten Commandment tablets and everything like that. And people walk away with that understanding that, they was just worshiping the wrong God, or it's a pagan God, or was worshiping a false God, or what have you, not seeing right there that they're worshiping Osiris. Right there. They're coming out of Egypt. So you got to understand what they're trying to give you here. The people he's leading out, remember, the black Hebrew is telling you, hey, say it all the time, the Jews were black. We know Kemet was black, right? So the people he's leading out, when you understand metaphorically, the people he's leading out are black people that's coming out of Egypt. So they're trying to give you the understanding that these are the people who we first indoctrinated. Remember, when they're leaving out of Kemet, there is no Judaism. What's going on? What's supposed to happen? They're getting the whole doctrine of the Torah from Moses. So this whole story that we call the Torah, the Old Testament, is happening with these people. They're walking in history, but the parable they're trying to give you in the book is that these are black people. Now, understand, it's going to make a lot of sense. Think about it. They come out, they're already worshiping the calf. That's the same thing that the Egyptians was doing, worshiping Osiris. They're telling you it's a bull calf, it's Osiris. So then, even after they leave, the whole time they're traveling, they're not paying attention to Moses and Aaron, not really respecting these dudes. He was pissed off at these people because everything that he's been showing them, they're not taking in. Now remember, I always talk about this with the Old Testament. The Israelites going out, the Hebrews are conquering. They have the Ark of the Covenant, which we know is the Ark of the Contract that the ancient Egyptians had. So again, right there, it's another clue that they're giving you that these people are the ancient Egyptians. They're black people. You understand? Who carries that Ark of the Contract? Is the Egyptians. They changed it to the Ark of the Covenant. So the whole time they're going out and they fighting these wars, right? And they're winning. They're going out. And think about it. They're still not obeying God. So that goes back to what I talked about with the whole creation of Serapis. What is Serapis? Osiris and Apis, right? Osiris and Apis, Apis the bull, Osiris, they both representing Saturn, right? So they're trying to give these people this worship of Serapis, and people are not taking it. And this is why Judaism was created, and they're giving you this whole understanding in this story. So think about it. They're going out. What kept happening to the people, to the Israelites? They kept falling in with different tribes and worshiping their gods. And keep telling them in the Bible, hey, don't worship any gods before me. Now, who were the gods that these people was worshiping? Baal and Rephaim and Moloch. So when you pay attention to these gods, all goes back to Saturn, right? It's all Saturn. So the Israelites are going out. They're killing these people who are worshiping Saturn. And that's all a parable, because that is the understanding that they're trying to get rid of the old way of worshiping. But they're really trying to get rid of the understanding of this worship from the regular people who is still worshiping Saturn because they know what's out there. They know what's going on. Remember, they could see Saturn with the naked eye. All that changed. So they had to go out and get rid of the people who understood and knew this information to usher in this new understanding. So in real life, the Greeks going out and conquering these lands from these African people, the Romans going out and conquering these lands from these African people, as them taking the land from the people who had this knowledge, who had this understanding already. They already knew what was going on. They knew what was out there. They had to get rid of these people and change that shit. So then you have the Israelites who know the same thing these people know. They know what they're worshiping. So they go on, why do you think they kept falling in with these people and worshiping? If you carrying the Ark of the Covenant, it's supposed to be power. You've seen Moses part to see everything that they seen. They was not accepting none of that shit. They kept running back to these different gods. And you go throughout the Old Testament, that's what you keep seeing. Falling in with these different gods. Even when they got sent to Babylon, the whole Babylonian exile, which I just covered. Even when they got sent to Babylon, you go to Babylon, who's in Babylon? Babylonians worshiping Saturn. The Assyrians also did before them. worshiping Saturn. We find the worship of Saturn there as well. So many civilizations that mention Saturn. As I said, you go back in the ancient world, and that's what you're going to find. Different civilizations mentioning Saturn by different names. And that was the thing. It was so much worship going on of Saturn, and they understand this, and they hid this information. They didn't want people to understand that you had this universal, this global worship of Saturn going everywhere. Everywhere we look, we find it by different names, talk about the same exact thing. Now, it's one of the things I've talked about before, with Saturn having this connection with the moon and the sun. And this connection, what I believe from my research, has something to do with, their ability to slow down atoms. So we know the sun supposedly can speed up atoms, and Saturn was supposed to be able to slow down atoms, and they were in opposite, which, Saturn will be Satan, the sun will be God or Jesus or what have you, when you understand this whole tug of war. And then the moon plays this vital role in basically projecting it onto us. As I said before, the moon is called the Earth's natural satellite. That's something we got to think about. Don't know if Saturn is a base. We don't know if Saturn is a satellite. We don't know if Saturn projecting this reality. But it seems as if, from my research, that you have this power of Saturn, the moon, and the sun that is slowing down the vibration in this area, slowing down atoms to the point where it can create elements and make the physical world that we see today. And outside of that is actual reality. It's what, you would have to do to encase or trap this all-powerful energy. How would you keep something as powerful as this soul encased in something? How would that be possible? You would have to sit in a lab and scientifically come up with something that can house this power. And this is what we call the body, which is why it's amazing. And when you look at the ancient civilizations who talked about the body, the ancient Egyptians was obsessed with it. And they kept hounding on the mind, the body, how this whole thing is so amazing and powerful, as if it was new to them. And it's amazing what they did in the brain and how all this works along with this energy. It's something to really think about, why they put so much into it. And it's okay. The Egyptians was talking about leaving the body and coming back to the body. And you have so many people talking about, the portal, the way out is through the sun, through Saturn, through the moon. There's so many different ways that lead you, things that lead you to different ways. And I talked about going into the temple of Osiris. And that's what it's talking about, to leave and not come back through certain ways, to go to certain areas. The Dogon talked about them coming in from Sirius star system and from other directions. You have all this worship of Saturn culminating into these different civilizations talking about different things. And this is why I said before, they was coming down and then they stopped. Then all of a sudden we start seeing these sacrifices happening, start popping up. And as I said, this is what they talked about in the Bible. And it all starts to make sense. But when you go to Mesopotamia, this is where you see the most of this worship. You see it a whole lot. And they knew back then exactly what they was talking about as far as it being Saturn. So the cover up was on. So it can look like they're talking about these many different gods, by different names, but it's all pointing to Saturn. So when we go and we look into Zoroastrianism and we look into what they talked about in Babylon and in Sumer, and everybody's thinking, oh, it's all these different gods, and it's the same God. All of it goes back to Saturn. That's the crazy part. It goes back there, and they made stories to separate you from this understanding. And it's what Akhenaten was basically saying. We're talking about the same thing. It all goes back to the one. You have all these other different gods that they're talking about, but there are aspects of nature, the body, the mind. You understand? And it has nothing to do with the one, which they call the one, the all true powerful God, which would be Saturn, which is the God of all gods, as they say. But this is from Mesopotamia, and this is what it was saying about Saturn and the worship of Saturn there. Now, planet Saturn as a Mesopotamian god, Utu or Utu. I've heard it pronounced that as well. Think about that, Bono. So Utu is a Sumerian god, and oldest documents mention Utu can be found around 3500 BC. Utu was god of the sun, dark sun, aka Saturn, and divine justice. He is the son of the moon god Sin/Nena, associated with cattle and frequently described as a shepherd, and the fertility goddess Ninjal in the Sumerian tradition. To the Akkadians, he was known as Shamash, which we talked about Shamash right here, who explained Anu or Enlil, who claimed Anu or Enlil as his father. He is usually depicted as an old man with a long beard whose shoulders emanate rays of light, but is also represented as a solar disk, which we see that solar disk in Egypt, or in the Neo-Assyrian period, 912 through 612 BCE, as a disk with wings, which we see in Zoroastrianism as well as in Kemet. Shamash became known as the god of justice and equality and was the judge of both gods and men. At night, Shamash became the judge of the underworld, Osiris. In Sumer, his cult centers were at Larsa and Ridu, and to the north, in Akkad. He was famously venerated as Sipar. His temples were known as Ibabar, White House, or Shining House, which name attached itself to the god as Babar, the illuminating one. Humans have been aware of Saturn, Lord of the Rings, and other inner planets since prehistoric times, although its earliest recorded history can be traced to Babylonian astronomers who observed and recorded its movements on Sumerian clay tablets, which date back to between 3500 BCE and 3200 BC. There's also references which show Saturn might have been observed already about 9000 BC. And we know in Kemet, as I talked about, that was one of the jobs they did, was people who started their day at night. And they came out and that's all they did was calculate the heavens, the stars, or what have you, and the movements and what was going on. But we see this in other ancient civilizations as well. Now, as I said, there's other gods that we know about, but all goes back to Saturn. Now it says, other gods that are depicted as Saturn. Because Saturn is one of the earliest gods and known as king of the gods, it is associated with numerous gods. Saturn is also known as, and you can go ahead and read all these names. You see Allah, you see Kronos, you see Nimrod, Yahweh. I'm not going to read all of these. Roman god Saturn was described as a god of time, generation, dissolution, abundance, wealth, agriculture, periodic renewal, and liberation. The Temple of Saturn in the Roman Forum housed the state treasury and archives of the Roman Republic and the early Roman Empire. Who's running everything right now? It's Rome. And people still find that hard to believe. It's Rome. We have Saturn Day. Saturday, that's Roman. They created the whole thing. The Romans identified Saturn with the Greek titan Kronos. Diodorus of Sicily reported that the Chaldeans called Kronos Saturn by the name Helios, or the sun, and he explained that this was because Saturn was the most conspicuous of the planets. Hyginus also wrote that Saturn was called Sol, which means sun. In the Babylonian astrological text, the word Shamash, sun, was used to designate Saturn. You're going to be hard-pressed to find anything different when you dig deep into this. This is what you're going to find. The culmination of it all is all going back to that. And behind closed doors, everything we see is so much symbolism going on, so much to point your eyes this way and that way. But it's to hide the fact that you have this universal worship of Saturn that everybody was engaged in. And if people knew that, they would start to look a lot more differently at Saturn and what was that all about and what was going on. Again, I talked about the ancient Egyptians. When you see these huge hieroglyphs of these huge ancient Egyptians coming down, and you have people say, hey, these are beings from Saturn, the black beings from Saturn. There's so much into that. It's a lot more. I don't like to get into too much of the spooky talk. When you have so many different people saying that they believe that these were the so-called, travelers or, ancient astronauts or what have you coming from Saturn. When they say Saturn or when they say black people, then you pay attention because there's truth to that.